well. And just to remind you to ask as many questions as you'd like and share any thoughts or any comments during the discussion via the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the right. So that's enough for me for now. And I'll hand over quite swiftly to Sharon to get started. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Jade, and hello to our audience, to our guests that are here today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Jade and all the other organizers for all their hard work in putting this event online. Also, I'm sure you've all signed up to meetings and sessions, but if you haven't, please do so. So biotech is indeed an exploding trend, but because of its momentum, I thought it important to dive into the nuances as much as the technology and think about what we truly need to do to achieve a more sustainable and equitable food system. So for those of you who do not know me, I'll briefly introduce myself prior to starting. I've been working around the agri-food tech scenes for almost a decade, and I've made it my mission to unite ecosystems and foster collaborations and accelerate innovation towards improving our food system that indeed needs a lot of TLC. But after building a very large event in Milan, I decided to truly engage and build a holistic systemic platform based on regenerative business models in which we can all benefit from. And whether I work with a government or a startup, collaboration and sharing the knowledge and building on best practices is at the center of it all. So today, together with Nigyar Makhmudova, Chief Growth Officer of Danone, Juan Aguilar, Kerry's Group Head of Sustainability and Technology Ventures, and Alexander Hoffman, Managing Partner at KSV, we will try to ask and answer some fundamental questions that go beyond the obvious and think also of the unintended consequences, risks, and opportunities, of course, that lay ahead. We need to think holistically. Linear thinking is what has gotten to us here in the first place. And we face way too many challenges. And we have to look at the whole supply chain and not just the end product, and ensuring that the end product is sourced sustainably from farm to begin with. So we will dive into the meaning of what an equitable food system should be. Good, nutritious food for all is the model. And let's see also how biotech can support that promise. And of course, we will look at the technology enablers that can make this happen. So this is, I think, an important conversation to kick off this event. And without much further ado, I'd like Nigyar, Juan, and Alex to briefly introduce themselves as well. Nigyar.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the brief introduction, Sharon. I'm Nigyar Makhmudova, Chief Growth Officer of Danone, the company which many of you, I'm sure, know, and the house of the brands which many of you, I'm sure, love. The company which is driven by mission, which is more than 100 years old, and the mission is to bring health through food to as many people as possible, which means that we are working every day to make sure that we have given access to high quality food and safe hydration to people around the globe. And very happy to join this discussion today, because it's very much is in line with our deep belief and a frame of action, which is based on the deep belief that every time we make a choice of what we eat or drink, we also make a choice for the planet we want to live in, which is expressed as One Planet, One Health frame of action of Danone, and which calls out for all of us operating in a food ecosystem to act together so that there is no contradiction between the health of people and the health of planet. Thanks for inviting me to join this panel.
Juan, up to you.
Yes, so thank you, Sharon. Hello, everybody. So I'm Juan Aguiriano. I was with DuPont for 27 years. I've been with Kerry now for 5 years. And I look forward to the discussion. Today, I will cover a little bit more on the technology side of things, and in particular, how we are able to provide enough protein for a growing population without using 2 or 3 planets, right? And so that is a key challenge. I'll highlight a couple of technology trends which are happening in the next parts of the comments, and I look forward to the discussion with my esteemed colleagues here.
Thank you, Juan. Alex, up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Thanks for the invitation. So Alex Hoffman is my name. I'm the managing partner at Kingston Schweizer Ventures, short KSV. We're extremely fresh off the press venture fund that are aiming to raise an impact fund focusing primarily on climate. Food and agriculture will play a massive role in this. We all know this. So I will spend some time on speaking also about the impact investors' perspective on food, biotech, and the overall, let's say, field of how we will feed humans on this planet in the longer term. And the one topic that I will focus also a little bit more on, or try to focus on, is again, from an impact investment perspective, are we considering all the potential consequences that novel technologies will bring in the longer run, and how can we try to assess these today and try to also assess the risks in the best possible way as we know them today. My background is that I've spent the last years at Ventures, the corporate venture fund of Merck KGaA, a science and technology company, and I was responsible for investments in frontier tech and sustainability, and have there made my first investments in food tech, primarily in the field of cultivated meat and recombinant protein for dairy products. Very much looking forward to the panel discussion today, and looking forward to more questions as well at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. So I would just dive in with the first question, which let's take it from the top, talking about technology. So Juan, biotech is now a huge trend and a needed technology that can deal with many of the challenges our food system faces. What are, in your opinion, the different technology enablers that we are seeing today?
Thanks, Sharon. So we've seen in recent years the big increase in plant-based proteins, and we talk about hundreds of billions that have been invested in that. And I think this is today already. This is what is available today to consumers, and consumers are buying that, and it's growing double digits very, very fast. So I think what's happening in that market, and we can talk a little bit more, is what are the feedstocks that use? Let's make sure that the plant-based proteins, for instance, are based on sustainable feedstocks. It's not the same to have almonds, then rice, then pea, then soy, or the future feedstocks. But I think that's today. I like to go a little bit ahead and seeing what's happening tomorrow, right? So I looked at the numbers in the Q3. VC investment for food tech was globally around 10 billion. Which for year to date is 28 billion. So we can see just in the quarter three, 10 billion, that's close to 1/3. But in the quarter, that's the second largest quarter of investment in VC. Biotech or fermentation was 2.2 billion out of that. And that's 3x what the running rate was in the previous quarter, and much bigger than the previous year, right? So as a leading indicator of where things are going, it's in fermentation. Okay, and for instance, two startups, Nature FYND and Perfect Day, each got 350 million. So we're not talking mini investments. This is very significant, right? So why fermentation? Well, everybody knows fermentation has been going, traditional fermentation we're familiar with. When you drink beer, you eat cheese, or you have kombucha tea, that's fermented food, right? And that's been going on for 3,000 years. It's just become more sophisticated and at scale, and there's big markets there. Yogurt is another example, some types of yogurt. Now, biomass fermentation refers to the cultivation of microbial organisms with the purpose of obtaining as much as possible of the microorganisms mass to use as food, such as alternative protein. And this is growing quite quickly. Now, historically, we produce yeast extracts, or probiotics. We're now looking to alternative proteins. That's one area for investment. Precision fermentation is the latest, more precise, if you want, in the word. It uses the metabolism of microorganisms to produce microbes to act as cell factories for specific compounds of interest. So you can produce organic acids, vitamins, proteins, enzymes, and others, right? And so the future of fermentation, the beauty of that is you don't use land, you don't use as much water, you don't use as much energy. You bypass the land and you create food. And the current precision fermentation stage today, the beauty of that is the consumers are buying that. The number of food, I looked at the statistics there too. The number of launches of food which has some type of preservation claim on the pack, right, has increased by 52% between 2017 to 2020. Right? It's more traditional fermentation, but from a fermentation point of view, I think the consumer, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that, is quite ready to buy more fermentation-based products. From a sustainability point of view, this is a process that has many advantages. When you think you can take waste streams, right, many waste streams, and we have 1.3 trillion tons of waste that we produce every year, that you're repurposing waste streams into alternative proteins or other types of interesting ingredients, as we talked about. I think the promise of fermentation here is very good. Now, when you go, and then after that, and we've seen a number of investments there, is cell agriculture or cell factories where you are able to create not only alternative proteins but meat, right? Meat or eggs or other types of animal-based protein, but without the animals, right? So I think this is the staircase we have in front of us, and I think today is plant protein, and version 2 of plant protein is segmenting that. Tomorrow is precision fermentation and the variations of that. And after tomorrow is cell meat, right? And think in 5 minutes, that's the summary I can give this stage, Sharon.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, that's a lot to unpack. And I think one thing that, from talking about technology, we can't not think about, the consumer aspect of it all, right? So Nigyar, on the consumer side, there are, as I said, a few things to unpack here from what Juan said. How do we ensure that the food that we produce is not only nutritious, but also accessible to all people? And also, what do we need to do to ensure consumer acceptance? Because it's not that of a given.
Indeed. What Juan is describing sounds like a food revolution. And we do believe that the food revolution is on its way. And food revolution is the way people think, talk, and express their needs when it comes to the food they eat or the drinks they drink, the water they drink. And Danone as a company, we believe that it cannot come, the different food forms, they cannot come at expense of each other, but they have to contribute to giving everyone access to healthy and nutritious food and the safe drinking water. And unfortunately, not everyone in the world has it. And in order to understand what's the way people think about it, the best way is to listen to them. And that's why Danone sponsored, together with Foodterra and Bloom companies, the social listening since 2018. So we have 3 years of the social listening data of what people think about the food. And first of all, I have to say that there is a stark difference between what people accept and think about before COVID, before pandemic hit, and after. And it expresses in the 2 major buckets. First, the number of conversations about the food, and we've listened the conversations not by countries but by language. It's in English and Spanish languages, and it's a social listening. First of all, in the 2018 when we started, there were 30 million conversations, any conversation which is mentioning food or hydration. In 2020, after the pandemic hit and we all discovered ourselves in the new reality, that number went from 30 million to 107. That means that there is at least 3 times more interest or among people to understand what is their food access, what is they want to have. The second big bucket of the shift, it really shifted from understanding the planetary diet and how it all impacts the planet to a very, very basic, do I have access to food? And let's face it, that according to the World Resource Institute estimates that 70%, we will need 70% more food calories in the next 30 years to feed 10 billion people, 70% more. So far, the food industry was coping with the pace of the growth of the population. However, estimate is that still more than 190 million people lack sufficiency in food and nutrients. And over 60 million people in 2014 in the US food and agriculture are lacking, in the US, one of the most developed countries, are lacking access to nutritious food. If we continue the practices of the agriculture and the food production as they are currently, we will not be able to feed. We will not be able to give the access to the good nutrition. We will not be able to shift the health of people and the shift the behavior. So hence, the biotech is one of the most important enablers, and going to the alternative proteins and cultivated and the cell, what Juan was talking, it's not a choice, it's a must to be able to give the access. With this comes consumer acceptance, and that's where we will need to work together as CPG companies, as governments, on regulators, on making sure that people understand, because what is it, and that we do not repeat some of the mistakes of the other industries where the lack of understanding was leading to demonizing some of the food forms. This we cannot afford to happen, simply because we need to stand and vote for the food justice, and we need to ensure that people have access and they understand that the food which is given to them from the different manufacturers and in different formats, it's safe, it's nutritious, and it contributes to their health. So that's what we will be working all together.
Indeed, you know, we have to do this this right. And picking up on what you just said, one thing that we see, and I would ask anybody that like to, you know, to just answer, like that we see right now with the plant-based, right? Although it's more sustainable, if we don't source things correctly, it, you know, you lose on that sustainability. You know, if we have to ship ingredients all over the world. So if, I don't know if anybody wanted to jump in on that.
So if
and
I
how
can
can we do it
continue,
better?
as
Yep.
if I can continue on the plant-based specifically, as Danone is the world leader in a plant-based, and we have a big business and a growing business. Indeed, it's about the sourcing strategy. It's about the regenerative agriculture practices.
Yes.
It's about encouraging the farmers to do what's right for the planet. And it's about taking the firm decisions on your sourcing and really making sure that these plant-based alternatives are healthier to the planet and to people. As an example, for the European plant-based business, we took a pledge that the entire sourcing will be of soybeans will be the European soybeans, not flying them from other parts of the world. And we are also working with startups which are enabling us to formulate products with artificial intelligence instruments to meet not only nutritional objectives, but also planetary objectives and being sustainable. And it's a great advancement of making sure that the formulations support what the plant-based diet is supposed to bring: health to people, but also be kinder and better for the planet.
Yeah, if I add, thank you, I fully agree with your comments. And I just add a couple of things. If you talk about plant-based right now, it's two aspects, right? It's the nutritional and the environmental and social impact, right? So it's sustainable nutrition is the three topics in one. So it needs to make sure that whatever alternative protein or plant-based protein is there as a complete nutritional profile, with all the 12 key amino acids, right? Not every plant-based on its own protein can do that. So what you need to do is really blend different types of proteins to get complete formulas, right? So soy is quite good, very good, similar or very high in nutritional value, but it's not the case for other types of protein. So that's one thing to look at as the plant-based brands are formulating. The second thing is the source, as we talked about, is if you're getting soy, right? Is it GMO or is it contributing to deforestation, or is it European source, as we talked about, right? So, and if it's almond, is it's based in country? Almond requires a lot of water. So if you cultivate almond in regions of the world where there's no water, not very sustainable again, right? Roughly for every liter of almond-based drink, you probably need 1,200 liters of water equivalent. So that's very, it's difficult if you don't do that in regions where you have enough access to water. And so other proteins have other issues. Maybe it's rice, I'll mention again, has tendency to emit a lot of carbon as you cultivate it. And so you really need to look at what are the right proteins in the right context locally. And so oats, for instance, is very good for northern hemispheres, but wouldn't grow in other parts of the world, right? So if you start transporting it around the world, not very sustainable again. So I think aligning supply chains, different sources of proteins, and understanding the specificities of that is very, very important.
Absolutely. And speaking of this with Alex, I'd like to to just think with you, what are really the unintended consequences of scaling the transformation? We talked about the issues around, plant-based, but, with biotech, and what are the risks and opportunities that you see ahead?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sharon. And I think so far the comments are fully aligned also with the perspective I think I intend to share a little bit, because I think as in my role now, especially as with a big focus on impact investing, I think key question will always be, how do we define impact, right? Is impact a single KPI? And it's rarely just one KPI, and many things come together. And then obviously also in what time frame are we thinking? Because as you look at novel technologies, and the furthest you can look ahead, it looks like the balance is apparently positive and will make sense in the long run. The question is really, when we speak of really massive scale and how many things we can possibly foresee with the knowledge that we have today. I mean, obviously it's sometimes very, very difficult, because we don't have sufficient data that can point us in the direction that will give us the right answer to whether something is impactful or not, in the positive or negative way. So I think if we just look at, for example, I mean, the meat market, as we have touched upon this multiple times today already, I think is a good example of that. And if we basically look at, for example, the size of plant-based meats today, and according to the Good Food Institute, that's, I think, revenue-wise, approximately at $7 billion. If you compare this today to the entire meat market, which is, $1 trillion market today, that basically is less than 1%, which, obviously it's a growth market and things will develop differently. There has been another study from Kerry, and I think everyone knows this, where you have the development of the entire meat market and how it will split basically into conventional meat, plant-based alternatives, as well as cultivated meat. And if we look there into the future, the overall meat market is projected to grow to 1.8 trillion size, of which I think 25% will be attributed to plant-based. So if we take this into account, this will be like a more than 60 times growth in the next 20 years of the plant-based meat market, which overall, sounds great. And I think all the companies in that space will probably play their role in this part as well. But I think a big question of that would also be, where are all the ingredients coming from? So we touched upon those topics, but again, considering that scale of 60 times of what we have today, will raise questions on where do we get ingredients from? Will it be soy? Will it be pea? Will this actually potentially lead to more monoculture than we actually want? So I think many factors will play a role, but to be able to satisfy that large scale that we will need at that point in time just raises questions. And the same will go for cultivated meat. When we think about, obviously one part being the cost, that cost will have to go down to be able to reach price parity and therefore consumer acceptance. But also here, for the cells to grow, you will need growth factors, you will need certain input and cultured media that will have to come from somewhere. And currently it looks very much like that it won't work without agricultural input either. So also here the question, and this is again, I think projected to be even larger by 2040, so represent a 35% market share of this massive 1.8 trillion meat market. There will also be question marks around where will all the ingredients come from. And I think if you do basically this bottom-up calculation of how much meat one factory can produce with the cultivated meat technology, you will, at the end of the day, also need a large number of meat factories or cultivated meat factories that will have to produce all basically the food. So without saying that, we shouldn't invest or we shouldn't do that, but it's sometimes, of course, parts of that, let's say, landscape that we're trying to look at from an impact investing perspective, to try to look as far ahead as we can and try to at least estimate the potential risks that are coming up, how it will, for example, affect the agricultural landscape, how it will affect farmers also in the long run, and therefore try to see, are there ways already from early on where we can also integrate those who will be affected negatively in the future, to see if they can be, for example, work together as well, still farmers, for example, but to instead grow animals, grow the input materials for the cells to grow. So these are, I think, just contextual thinking that we're trying to apply in our investment thesis, despite being, of course, complicated and sometimes, can also lead to the negative outcome that we say, well, then we don't invest if it doesn't have the net positive balance in 50 years from now. But obviously, I think we all understand it's also very much based on assumptions, and we are still convinced that, especially in those fields of biotechnology applied to food, if done in the right way, will still have so many benefits over conventional production that will essentially also help us both from a nutritional perspective, but also from a planet perspective, become more sustainable in the long run.
Absolutely. We need to warrant viable supply chains and diversify our crops while protecting biodiversity, first and foremost, right now, right? You guys, Nigyar, Juan, would you like to add something in terms of, these big issues, which are issues that, both your companies, I'm sure, take into account? I mean, we need to look at a 360-degree approach. We need holistic approaches instead of having a linear kind of thinking right now, with so many challenges to resolve.
Yeah, Nia, you want to go ahead or?
No, please go, Juan.
I think Alexander did a very good context. I think there is not a black and white or a silver bullet solution here. You need to look at the portfolio of options that make the total. I'll take protein as an example because it's foundational macronutrients, and as you know, we have billions of people that move from a carbohydrate-rich type diet to a protein-rich diet. We don't have enough protein right now to feed that in a sustainable way. So that's the basic mathematics of the challenge, right? And you can't be shipping beef from Brazil to China. That doesn't work, right? So when you see the largest meat producers in the world, and let's start there, right? Because as Alexander said, the vast majority of the protein nowadays is animal-based, right? And so we need to look at the way we grow livestock and the way we farm. So we need to go to models which are much more regenerative than degenerative in nature in the farming. The second, it's not independent of. Right now, very often our agriculture is split in two, right? You have the crops on one side and the animals on the other. There is a thesis that says we should go back to the past and put them back together. And there's a big debate there, a very healthy debate beyond the purpose of this panel, but let's say that's a big debate because agriculture represents 70% of the uses of water and 20% of the greenhouse gases, and you have 2 billion smallholders out there, right, that do not have access to precision agriculture. So how do you get them up to speed to what we're talking about here, right? So that's a massive challenge. Then once you go into protein, you say, okay, I need to do more sustainable meat. And the good news is the largest meat companies in the world have signed up to science-based targets and they want to stop deforestation, etc. So they have declared their, I will go to the moon Kennedy type moment, right? And the good news is we went to the moon in 10 years, but the whole America Inc. had to mobilize to do what Kennedy said, promised. So I think the same will have to happen in the food industry for the meat, so for the animal-based meat, for the plant-based meat, for the fermentation, and eventually for the cell-based meat, right? Each of them have the unique opportunities and challenges, and they are different, right? And in some cases, it's going to be consumer acceptance. And in that order, the further out we go out there, the more complicated it gets for consumer acceptance. The second one is regulatory acceptance, which is, okay, and that tends to be a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator, but sometimes you can't get novel food approved. It takes a long time. So that discussion is going to have to change with the institutions. And then last but not least, food is a system, right? It's not only the protein, you need the taste, because if it doesn't taste good, people eat it once and never again, and then they throw it. And so you create more waste. And so the second one is the food preservation. Okay, plant-based creates sometimes more waste because it's new systems. So we don't have yet, and we're working a lot here, Kerry, on that, creating preservation and shelf life, so it doesn't go to waste, right? Because remember, 30% of the food waste of the food is never consumed every day. It's again 1.3 billion tons, or 1 trillion if I get my zeros, kilos, right? If I get my zeros right, I never do, by the way. And then the last challenge is all the texture and the appearance and all that, right? We still have a lot of funky kind of E letters, etc., like that, and the consumers want to eat anything which doesn't sound natural, they won't eat, right? So we are going to have to figure out in these new technologies how we do the optimization of all that under constraints. It's not easy. The end consumer wants it all. It has to taste great, it has to be super nutritious, it has to be fully clean label, based on regenerative agriculture, cheap and affordable on the net, and, right? And the list of constraints is massive, which is great because the new consumer is raising the bar and he wants to consume sustainable food. But going through that revolution or transformation, as Nigyar said at the very beginning, is not without its challenges. Let's put it like that. It's actually a massive opportunity. It's a massive challenge. And if I may say, I think the food industry impact, within the food industry, we know that, but I don't see enough talk of the food industry at COP26, for instance, if I give just a general comment, a little bit out of the discussion of this panel, and that concerns me.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree.
Because we're part of the solution here, not the problem. And so that's the good news, right?
Absolutely. You can't really fix the situation without talking about the food system. It just won't happen. Nigyar, would you like to add something?
Well, I fully agree with everything Alex and Juan are saying. And just to visualize maybe, because the food waste is a big problem. And indeed, as Juan was saying, it's a 30%. And just to visualize, I saw this data point. It's 6 full garbage trucks of edible, perfectly edible food, which is wasted every second.
Yes.
Every second. It's just mind-blowing. And I agree that only acting together, we can really deal with this problem beyond even the affordability, because it's a big issue of affordability of the new forms of food and accessibility. What can we do? And we can, of course, wait until there is a more fundamental solution, but it's not an option. We should act, and we should act together on all the players of the food industry. And as a company, we took few steps which may seem to be small, but at the end they will make a big difference, I believe, as well. The steps which are giving people, educating them on what the good diet looks like, because everything what Juan was saying, it assumes, in terms of the acceptance, it assumes a significant shift of behaviors of people in the way they eat. And let's face it, with urbanization happening across the globe, and the middle class growing, the meat consumption is growing. And therefore educating and giving this understanding of the more fruits, vegetables, legumes, it's a better part of the diet. It's a big part. And we can do a step together. And Danone is a big and active sponsor of the collaboration for healthier life on the platform of the Consumer Goods Forum. And we are putting actions with the trade, with the retailers, with other manufacturers, just to raise awareness, just to make sure that people understand, and therefore gradually we shift the behaviors and we shift the acceptance. That's one example. Another example of really formulating with the advances which we have in the science, the products which are fighting specific nutrient deficiencies in the countries. Because again, not every countries are born and developed equally, and we have the significant health challenges in the different countries. Again, just for the data point, the problem of the obesity and malnutrition, which are the two extremes of the same problem of not having access to a good quality food, is costing all of us $14 trillion US dollars a year. So for sure there is money to reinvest back into the good practices and the good things which we do. So, you know, as a company, we innovate to bring products which are fighting the specific and giving people opportunity to have a choice and to fight specific nutrient deficiencies in the different countries. I'll give you an example of the brand SGM, which is a infant nutrition brand in Indonesia, which is suffering a lot with iron deficiency and fighting the iron deficiency and giving the opportunity for healthier growth. It's one, again, it could be a small example, but we believe it's a very important example of where we can act together, science, suppliers, all the players act together to combat the food injustice problem.
Yeah, I give you one example, if you don't mind, Sharon and Nigyar, which came to mind as you were talking on food waste, right? How biotech can help food waste for the meat industry, right? Every day, 20% of the meat goes to waste. It's the highest value. And it's also 1 kilo of meat is, if it's beef, depending where it is, can be up to 60 kilos of CO2, and it's 14,000 liters of water, right? So if you can minimize the food waste, 20% of the meat waste that happens every day. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, shelf life. If you can preserve the meat, but not with chemicals, right? Nitrates, benzoates, whatever. You do it through biotech, fermentation, preservation technologies. You take old ingredients, vinegars, botanical extracts, etc., but you do it with science, and you increase every day of shelf life. Gives the opportunity to the consumer to consume the meat longer. Yes. But what's the barrier here? It's not the technology. The barrier is the consumer. When he sees long shelf life, he thinks this is not fresh, I want to eat it. Actually, they throw too much fresh meat. If the meat can stay longer, meat, processed meat, fresh meat, whatever, you can keep it longer. It's better. It's still healthy for consumption, and it's healthier for the planet. So that's one simple barrier, but very complex and educational, right? So we are investing in Kerry massively into shelf life solutions, clean label shelf life solutions, no chemicals, and going there and putting and doing that, replacing either chemical solutions, but more importantly, preserving meat and meat products which have nothing right now, right? And in emerging markets, in 80% of the world population is in emerging markets where even preservation is not used. So if you can introduce that and improve that, That's food tech, not for new alternative proteins, but to help meat become more sustainable, which is part of the battle, right? As Alexander highlighted.
Absolutely. So we touched on affordability, and we have a question from the audience that says, so many of these innovations take time to scale and bring down costs. What are the biggest bottlenecks between buyers and suppliers, and how can we create a more iterative approach to get these products into existing supply chains quicker? Anybody wants to tackle that one? So let's maybe, I don't know on, I would say high level, right? What do you see the greatest challenges of making these products affordable? And what do we need to do?
Well, generically, unless one of my colleagues want to go first, I think Alexander wanted to speak first. You go ahead.
Yeah, but I can maybe share some highlights on cultivated meat, because obviously that's one of those, it started with this first burger in 2013 with the $300,000 cost of production, and obviously this this won't work in the market. So I guess bringing costs down, there are a few bottlenecks, and most of them will be addressed as we speak, ranging from finding the optimal source of culture media composition, essentially to get this also to a cost level at which cell proliferation and the cell growth actually works really optimally. But along the entire, let's say, value chain, there will be levers that will drive the cost down ultimately. And I think to that question, the biggest bottlenecks between buyers and suppliers, depending on who we identify in these scenarios as the buyers and suppliers. But if the buyer is the consumer, then I would say price is one of the most driving factors, next to and some of other attributes that will have to be given in terms of taste and nutritional value, etc. But price will be very essential, I believe, because otherwise I think we will continue to target, let's say, a target audience that is anyway onboarded with that mission and is willing to pay the extra price. Probably the majority of us speaking here, I used to say, preaching to the choir, because we know the problem very well, and I think we try to adhere to it as much as possible. But the vast majority of the population who don't necessarily have the choice of paying premium, I think therefore price will play a very big role. And so I think, speaking of the bottleneck, that's at least the one thing I think makes will be a make or break point.
Absolutely. I mean, it can't be feeding the 1%. That is not sustainable.
Yeah, it's the chicken and egg. It's the scalability, Sharon.
Yes.
So to get volume, you need low cost. But to get
Yeah.
low cost, you need the volume. So how do you break that circle, right? So there are economies of scale and experience. And the good news is, if you see the plant protein trend, the cost and the price have been coming down, right?
Yes, indeed.
And so you can, and it's true for any technology. Now, will it be as fast enough? That's the key question, right? And how can you accelerate the scalability of, can we get to 25% alternative protein? It won't be only plant, it will be plant, it will be fermented, it will be cell-based. Can you get to 25? Can you get to 33 in 10 years? Or will it take 30 years? Too long, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the key cost drivers are going to be, in some cases, energy. I mean, if you cultivate cell meat, you need to do it at body temperature. So you need to keep these fermenters warm, right? So that's a lot of energy. So that might be a lot of CO2. Energy is getting up, the prices are up, etc. So there's not going in the right direction. You say, okay, do it on renewable electricity. Well, that's fine, but still driving the efficiency of the energy efficiency will be very, very important. Alexander mentioned that, the media, right? Where you need to feed these babies, right? So what you feed them and the efficiency of the media and how you feed them and grow them will be very, very important. So I think working at scale, and that companies start working beyond the startup world. There are probably 50, I think, last time I looked, Alexander, you know better than me, 50 cell meat serious startups out there, maybe more. And they're getting a lot of money, but it's still very little for the size of what we need, right? So the supplier to that industry is still nascent. So the suppliers will be where the key cost drivers will come from, right? And driving that at scale. So Kerry is part of that. We're looking at this as a supplier to that industry, etc. So that's an interesting question. So it's the same that was true for plant-based protein, will be true for fermentation. We're also present there. So we're looking at all of those. The scalability and the size and the industrialization is the key, right? So it's a lot of factories, as Alexander said, it's a lot of steel on the ground. It's a lot of inputs that where the cost needs to come down. Who's going to invest there? It's going to be interesting, right? Is it traditional investors, food industry, or is it going to be new ones? And a lot of new money coming into this space in food tech. If you look at the VC space, the good news is that food tech is growing very, very fast. But honestly, compared to fintech, it's very, very small. So not enough money yet.
Yes. Guys, I absolutely agree with everything you said. We are out of time. And I wanted to just get one last very quick comment from you. Anybody who wants to answer, if you do see the trend continuing, and what opportunity is there for food biotech? Because I see it like a growing trend for sure.
So maybe I start because the question is whether the trend will continue. Absolutely, yes. And it will become even stronger because there is a very clear realization during the pandemic time that there is a strong link between what we eat and our health. And therefore, people are looking for the solutions to stay healthy for longer. And it will be up to us to give them these solutions and to give them these choices. So absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. I think it has been a great conversation and a much needed one. And I believe everybody here is committed in doing better for people and our planet. And it is known that we all have the solutions to do so. We just need to sort of be bigger, better, and bolder, and not just evaluate one single solution, but see how that one solution impacts a system as a whole. And we've heard, from COP these days, there's not been an emphasis so much on food, but we do know how much it does impact. Technology is a great enabler, and we have to use it responsibly and ensure that biotech does not become the next GMO. So there's a lot to do. Definitely, it's more than just research, it's education, cooperation, and action. And we all have our part to play. Whether a corporate's a startup, a VC, a scientist, we're in this together. So let's start building on this today. Thank you all.
Excellent closing comments, Sharon. Thanks, Nigyar. Thanks, Alexander. It was enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks. You.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
You
Thank
too.
you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
That was a great discussion. Just so everyone that's still on the platform, just to let you know that the next session will start shortly, which is our showcase session, which is kind of spotlighting some of the interesting companies that we have joining us this week. So please join that session to watch their short company presentations and also engage with our presenters that will be online. And then following that, we will move on to our interactive roundtable. But thank you again. Thank you all for joining this first session. Thank you, the speakers, for kind of setting the scene. And I'll see you again later. Thank you all.